This program is called Two-Way Street for two reasons. One is because every issue has at least two sides, and as we see here, sometimes more than that. But also, in addition to the experts talking to you, you get to talk back with them, either by being in our studio audience here or supplying a webcam question to us in advance. Let's start with one of those videos. This one was sent in by Janet from New York.
Hi, Two-Way Street. Do nuclear threats from North Korea and Iran pose a serious risk to the United States? Although I don't think they do, as a Korean, I do feel that the United States should continue to push North Korea towards deproliferation, to protect South Korea, and to encourage eventual reunification.
All right, Doug, let's talk about North Korea specifically. Let's say we were to know that Kim Jong-il were about to sell some nukes to rogue elements. Should we adopt a preemptive strike, or what would we do?
Well, I think we have to look at North Korea and recognize that, Kim Jong-il is evil, but he's not stupid. This is a man who wants his virgins in this life, not the next. So I think North Korea can be deterred. And I think that's what we should focus on. We want to stop him from getting nuclear weapons, just as we don't want Iran to get nuclear weapons. But if triggering a war on the Korean Peninsula is very serious, I mean, you'd probably end up with Seoul destroyed. Seoul is the industrial and population heartland of South Korea. It's a lot easier for us to talk about war than the South Koreans. I'd say we draw a bright line. Sale to rogue elements, proliferation is something we cannot accept. That's very different from him having a small nuclear arsenal in which he wants to threaten and extort as opposed to use.
All right, Frank, what do you say?
I happen to think that wars most often get started by people miscalculating or behaving in some irrational way. And I think it's entirely possible that Kim Jong-il, with his particular proclivities, is capable of both.
And therefore it would be logical to preempt him.
And it would be difficult to preempt him, but we may need to do it.
Okay.
In fact, the evidence is clear that that's what he's about. Unfortunately, it rarely is, and that's what makes this so tough.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. How would you feel if the countries we have military bases in had military bases of their own in our country and or in the proportion that we have bases in theirs?
Larry?
Well, I think we wouldn't like it, and that's why I think we should not go to a country unless they ask us and insist on it. You know, it's interesting when Don Rumsfeld in 2003 was taking a lot of forces out of Germany, the German government called me and asked me to help persuade Rumsfeld to leave them there. So I think, that's true. And it's interesting when you talk, for example, we were going to put missiles and radars into Poland and the Czech Republic before Secretary Gates, changed that decision. Basically, what the Russians were saying is, how would you like it if we put missiles into Canada and Mexico? So I think you have to understand that from the other country's point of view.
Okay, Larry,
or
actually...
Venezuela.
Okay, then our next video is from Alex from Los Angeles, and Larry, this is coming to you too, so let's roll it.
Hey, Two-Way Street. Should America pour all of its resources they can into Iraq, or is it just a big, giant waste of resources? I mean, this country has a lot of problems right now, with not only economically, but in other ways in all of its cities. And should we pour all of that into Iraq? I mean, we really need the help here.
I'm guessing your answer is it would be a waste.
Well, I think Iraq was the greatest strategic blunder in the history of U.S. National security because it undermined our interest in other parts of the world. And it diverted us from Afghanistan. And now we saw what happened is Afghanistan, which really was the central front in the war on terror, went downhill. And there's a question about whether we can prevail there.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
Mr. Gaffney, isn't the surest way to start a worldwide arms race in most regions in this world is to withdraw American troops back home? In the Korean Peninsula, if you withdraw troops, you have a nuclear Japan. If you withdraw troops from the Middle East, you have a nuclear Saudi Arabia. All the smaller countries are going to go for the stronger horse and go to the most powerful countries. Doesn't that cause chaos? And isn't the last time we did that was the 1930s?
Yeah,
that's a softball to him, right?
I think, I'm just grateful for any question at all. Thanks for coming up with a good one.
Look, so then you guys have to chime in too. Quickly, go ahead.
The problem is we seem condemned, especially if we heed these sort of siren songs, to repeat very bad history. We can disengage. There's no question about it. Or we can just pretend that we're going to engage economically and create vacuums of power, and that they won't be filled by other people. And that those other people, if they do wind up filling them, won't be hostile to us. And if they turn out to be hostile to us, they won't act on their hostilities towards us. I just don't think it's going to work out that way this time any more than it has in the past. So yes, you're absolutely right. A lot of other people are going to find this an incentive either to arm themselves or to cut deals with bad guys and make the world for them and for freedom more generally, and certainly for us, more dangerous.
But I want to hear this side respond to that. You know, what do you guys say? Won't it nuclearize the world?
Look, my reaction is that the people who should defend South Korea are the South Koreans. We should not be expected to defend everybody else on Earth. And we do. Wealthy, populous, prosperous allies. These are welfare clients. If the South Koreans are threatened, let them defend themselves.
Well, what do you say?
And if it comes
Harry
down,
Truman disagreed with you with that in 1950, and the United Nations
well, they couldn't
disagreed
in
with you with that in
1950. Today they have
1950 as well.
40 times the GDP of the North. They have twice the population. China's not going to support North Korea today in a ground invasion. And if it comes to Japanese nuclear weapons, if we have to choose, am I willing to risk Los Angeles to protect Tokyo or Taipei or Seoul, or do I want Tokyo to risk Tokyo to protect Tokyo? You know, I might just say let the Japanese do it. This is not a cost-free analysis.
Okay.
You know, you set tripwires around the world, you're going to get yourself into a war unnecessarily.
Tim from Indiana has one, and Chuck, this will go to you. Let's roll it.
Hey, Two-Way Street. I think I have an interesting perspective of military use overseas, particularly because my brother has served 2 times in the past 4 years in Iraq. What the U.S. military is doing is they're primarily serving as trainers, as teachers, and as support staff for the Iraqi military and for the Iraqi government. So that way, eventually, the Iraqi government will be able to stand on their 2 feet. What do you think about that?
Chuck, he says that, yeah, they're teachers, they're trainers, they're not shooting people.
Well, Tim has highlighted an important issue is what do we want the military to do? I would like the military to be in existence to defend the United States against real military threats. I don't want us to be an armed social worker sallying forth in the world trying to do good when in fact that's not what the military is good at. The military is good at breaking things and killing people, and to ask the military to do things that it's not really designed to do is really a prescription for disaster. So, yeah, in the case of Iraq,
I mean, in his personal experience, I think his brother, he said, says it's going well. Says that the people appreciate the presence.
I'll say what I said before. The proof will be in the pudding. When we withdraw, let's see what happens to Iraq, and I will reserve judgment.
It's how and when we withdraw. But Bob, just quickly on this, training troops to fight for themselves is, I thought, what these guys were in favor of. It's not nation building, it's not armed social work. That's a perfectly legitimate military function. We do it very well.
Sir.
My question is premised on the perspective which does not find any discussion with this panel, and it is that ever since 4 centuries ago, René Descartes made a statement that man shall be lord and master of beast and nature. With that said, my question is, in a time when, last time when we had a president before Obama, George Bush, was pushing the issue of democracy in the world, how and on what grounds can we legitimately ignore the values and principles of democracy, where I think of the value of equality and freedom?
Are you suggesting that in places where we want one guy to win, we forget democracy, we try to do everything we can to subvert democracy to get our guy to win an election?
That would be the situation that I would be worrying about.
Okay, and it is the first René Descartes reference on our program so far that we've had to date. So I
probably
just wanted
on
to know
television in its entire history.
To ignore that.
No, but it's a serious point. It's a serious point. Go ahead.
Yeah, you make a great point, because what happens when the United States says one thing and does another, then people accuse us of hypocrisy. And when President Bush would say, you know, freedom is on the march and we're fighting for democracy, but yet then he would make deals with Musharraf in Pakistan. He would support the Egyptian government. In fact, when I go around the world, people will say that all of the time. Well, you know, you guys say one thing and do another. I think what we have to recognize, and during the Cold War, we allied ourselves with some unsavory characters, and in World War II, Remember Joe Stalin? That nations don't have permanent friends or enemies, they have permanent interests. And you need to keep
So
that
when there are bad guys and worse guys, sometimes we side with the bad guys.
That's correct. Jean Kirkpatrick, that was when we were at AEI, she wrote this thing about there are sort of good dictators and bad dictators.
And we think that there's also inalienable rights, and we are seeking to promote them for other people because we think that's in our interest too.
Human rights matter. I mean, so I think we should support human rights, but foreign policy is a very complex mess, and trying to design your foreign policy around promoting human rights and democracy gets you into trouble as well. I'd say let's take that into account, but it can't drive our foreign policy.
Okay. Because I think we do need to be careful if we're talking about democracy as sort of this central tenet for our foreign policy and therefore decisions we make about using military force. Real-life conversation, U.S. government and military officials talking to Iraqis, Iraqi to the United States. Freedom? You mean you want my daughter to be free to do anything she wants? Democracy? You mean you want me to live in a godless state? We have to understand that when we say certain words, freedom and democracy and certain concepts, they don't always mean the same thing or what we intended them to mean to other people. Culture and history matters.
And they're not just about elections.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Great show today. My question is twofold. One is, when we are spending so much money in Iraq battling terrorists, what about doing some institutional building, democratic institutional building in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan? That Pakistan is a failed state. We all know that now, regardless of whatever people might say. Instead of pumping military, can we not do something about developing institutions, which in Saudi Arabia as well?
That means give them money?
Give them money to build institutions. And
like what? Universities? What institutions are you talking about?
Education, judiciary, active, all this.
So when the American economy is floundering and we're in a huge amount of debt, we should be building universities in Pakistan.
Absolutely, because that's where you are going to be safer. Because if you are able to protect Pakistan, you are going to make yourself safer here. Mm-hmm. That's something which is very important. And second part.
Okay. Oh no, one part per guest. What about this idea?
If you said to me, take the defense budget as is and your development budget, add them two up, would you reallocate it? Yes, I would. And I would spend more. If you take a look at what we spend, for example, on military compared to what we spend on development, it's like 25 or 30 to 1. And we need to rebalance it because I think you're right. In the long term, that will provide us with more security.
Really? In our economy right now? That's going to be
No, I'm not adding any money. In other words,
it's part of the budget.
Well, why not just cut that and save the money and have less debt?
So, well, we're borrowing it from China. That's where we're getting the money.
So we borrowed from China and build colleges in Pakistan with that same money. This is your proposal.
Saying, no, you can. We are already.
Are you running for office under this plan?
I wish I was. Now that I'm a U.S. citizen, I might just.
Okay. All right. Well, good luck with that, as we say here in the United States. Okay, go ahead. Yes, Frank.
We have an error of epic proportions to the extent that we are ignoring the fact that Saudi Arabia is the prime mover behind this program of Sharia that I was talking about. In Pakistan, as well as in its own country, and as well as many others, including our own. Where we fail to appreciate that that is the character of the government we're dealing with, we fail to appreciate we've got a state that is, in fact, an actor in this war. And I think working on institutions of various kinds, putting money against it, but most especially being clear that that's what's required if you actually want to see these countries move in a democratic fashion. Giving, for example, an election in the Palestinian-controlled territories, which brought nothing but Hamas to power and great grief to the Palestinians and the Israelis and I think all of us, is folly. And we perpetuate that at our peril.
All right. Our next webcam comes from Australia. It's Carrie. Let's roll that.
Hi, I'm Kerry. I've got a question for the Two-Way Street panel. As an Australian, we're allies of the US and a part of the Afghanistan coalition. So we're fighting there too. But I wonder, why is it the US feels they have to be, say, the policeman of the world? Why do they have to get involved in other countries' policies?
Larry, policeman of the world, if you're there at a press conference, let's say you're president, you're in Australia, you have a press conference, and they say, why are you guys the policemen of the world? What's your answer?
Well, I would say we shouldn't be the policemen of the world. We should do what we have to do to protect our interests. You go back and you talk about like presidents like Eisenhower. He recognized we had to get out of Korea. He wouldn't go into Vietnam.
Okay, but just to interrupt you, so we should have bases all over the world, but this phrase policemen of the world you object to, but some people equate those two things.
Your bases, I think we're mixing up two things here. Okay, if you have a base in Germany, okay, that does not make you the policeman of the world. Among other things we haven't even spoken about, the reason we kept forces in Germany and Japan was the countries in the region, including Australia, were concerned that they might rearm and do some of the things that they had in the past.
Our next video is Alton from Brooklyn, and we're going to direct this to Chuck.
While I'm in favor of closing our bases around the world and bringing home our troops, I'm concerned about the cost for dismantling all those bases and bringing home all those tanks, missiles, and aircraft. And when the foreign host government discovered the environmental damages our base caused, they're going to hold us liable for the cost of cleanup, which might take years to complete. Added together, these costs could easily soar to the trillions of dollars. How are we going to pay for this?
We managed to pull out of Subic Bay in the Philippines as a huge naval facility, and that's a good start. I mean, there are going to be
break lease agreements. He's saying we're going to break lease agreements.
Look,
it's like paying the landlord. You lose the security deposit or something.
So instead, we should continue to pay for having U.S. troops in other people's countries. In sometimes maybe where the government invites them, but the general population may not be too happy about it. And we should do that because if we don't, it's going to cost us money, but we'll continue to inflame anti-American sentiment in these countries and possibly make the terrorist threat worse to us. Yeah, there are costs. We have to examine costs and benefits and do a real analysis of it.
Okay, go ahead.
Hello, gentlemen. I'd like to ask about the many American families, American people living, working on these bases, many of which are self-contained with military hospitals and shops and schools. I mean, what happens to those Americans that are eventually unemployed and displaced? Will that tip us over in our crisis, our economic crisis?
Okay. Go ahead.
Well, look, I mean, if you're thinking economic productivity, almost anything they do would be more productive economically than what they're doing now. If they're doing military things that should be for our national security, it's not for economic gain. It'd be far better for them to produce things that they want than to sit around defending other countries. Look, I've lived on those bases. I was a military brat. Many of the dependents that I dealt with were desperate to get back to America. Depending on where you're at, overseas deployments can be very unpopular. It depends. So they'd come back to America and do things that Americans want them to do and live in American society. I think it'd be perfectly fine.
Look, as we said earlier about defense spending and weapons procurement, we shouldn't have bases for economic reasons. We should have bases for national security reasons. If indeed there is no national security reason to have them, I believe generally there is, then you have to pay what it takes to bring them home. But let's be clear. We are right now spending something on the order of 60% of our defense budget, that big white pie that you showed earlier, Bob, on personnel-related costs. Running the gamut from just the pay of the troops to their benefits to health care to their dependents and so on. The fraction that we are actually spending, investing in ensuring that those troops are able to fight should they have to, and not, by the way, just today's wars against today's terrorist cells, but quite possibly, as history suggests is going to be true in the future as it has been in the past, big, bad actors. We're going to want to make sure that that investment is continued to be made, and it's not right now adequately.
Guys, let's roll one more webcam, the next one.
Hey, Two-Way Street. My question is, we're running nearly $1 trillion deficit and a healthcare plan that's going to cost about as much. How are we supposed to pay for that while waging 2 wars and maintaining military bases around the globe?
Look, I mean, the world is one of limited resources. We ran a $1.4 trillion deficit in 2009. We have a $12 trillion national debt. We have $107 trillion in unfunded Social Security and Medicare benefits. We have to decide what we can afford. We have to defend ourselves, but things that are not necessary for our defense, we need to cut. And I would argue defending wealthy, prosperous allies is one of them that should go. trying to refashion foreign societies is another thing that should go. Defend ourselves, not the rest of the world.
That is all the time we have for today. Please thank our guests, Charles Peña, Doug Bandow, Larry Corbin, Frank Gaffney. Thank you for watching Two-Way Street. And for more information and a list of reading suggestions about the subject, click on our website, twowaystreet.tv. I'm Bob Bowden, and we'll see you next time.